I actually am really excited. Michelle and I think we told you, we did this once before, a year ago, and it's been really nice to be able to do this together. It's nice when her work and my stuff kind of come together, and I've gotten so much out of her research on mindfulness meditation in everything that I do in the water, endurance sports and stuff, and I really think that this is probably a critical part of a training program that most of us don't spend a lot of time on, is actually, are we prepared for what's going to come? We spend so much time worried about getting ready for physically what's going to happen, that how do we deal when things don't go quite as we expect and stuff. So I'm really excited to share this with you guys, and if you have mail. So I'm going to let Michelle's going to start, and what we want to do is the mindfulness meditation. She's going to explain the science and how it actually affects your brain, both during and then long term. Why it's actually not just something you do right here, but actually is a practice. And then Michelle is the one that knows all the science and all the applications, and I'm just going to tell some funny stories afterwards to kind of put it into context. Maybe a couple of those you'll identify with and go, oh yeah, I remember when that happened, and this is how I apply this. This is why a practice in this actually can positively impact your racing, your training, your entire season. Actually, whether you're dressed to go out or whether you're at work, it has a positive impact across a lot of different areas of our lives. So, Michelle, I'll turn it over to her for now. Yep. Let's see. And in the meantime, I'm going to go see if I can find the light switch real quick.
Okay.
And I'll be back in just a second.
All right. So I started studying mindfulness meditation when I was in my graduate program, when I was in my PhD program my first year. I had to write a research proposal for my advanced research methods class. And I had a friend, Noah Levine, who did mindfulness meditation with kids in the juvenile justice system, and that was my population that I was studying to do work with, kids in the juvenile justice system. And I thought it sounded really cool that he was doing that, and that's how I ended up kind of choosing my career path, because it sounded kind of cool. And I really, initially, when my advisor and my professor for that class said, you should do this for your dissertation, this proposal, this research proposal to test would mindfulness meditation, does it work? What does it work to do with kids who in the juvenile justice system? I was like, I don't want to be like the hippie mindfulness researcher for the next 10 years. Happily, I found that there's a whole lot of science, and it's kind of unusual for interventions to have this much science behind it. So it's one of the few interventions that actually has been studied using MRIs and brain imaging and things like that. One of the things that, because I was getting my PhDs in social welfare, and so we study not only interventions in populations, but also kind of contextual and cultural and different environmental barriers to wellness and mental health and physical health. And so what I studied as my dissertation, what I continue to study, is the use of internet-based mindfulness meditation instruction, because kids in the juvenile justice system primarily come from really poor families and poor communities where which is the case with a lot of the interventions. They learn these really great things when they're incarcerated, and then they go home, and there's no way for them to practice it. They don't have access to therapy and things like that. And so that's how I, as a way of addressing that, and that kids learn, they're totally comfortable learning things off of the internet. And when I first started looking into this, I talked to some meditation teachers, and I'm not a meditation teacher. I study meditation, I practice mindfulness meditation after studying it for, as a researcher for 4 or 5 years. Finally started practicing it myself. So I talked to some meditation teachers, and they're like, oh no, you can't teach it like over the internet, like, or with MP3 downloads. And I didn't agree, so I went and I tried it anyway, and it turns out that you can. You can teach it using MP3 downloads that are free on the internet. Noah, this friend of mine, posts all of his, basically just recordings of his classes. He posts them on the internet for free. So kids can leave the justice system, and now I'm also looking into possibly studying with people who have spinal cord injuries, because there's also lots of barriers for them to get to practice wellness or do wellness practices that involve having access to health centers and things like that. So it does work. You can learn it just downloading stuff from the internet. So tonight though I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what I've learned about mindfulness meditation, because it helps to know like why should we practice this? What is this like? How does sitting down and thinking about your breath, have all these great outcomes associated with it. So outcomes such as increases in overall feelings of well-being, the ability of an increased ability to self-regulate our emotions and our behavior, increases in self-awareness, better sleep, decreases in anxiety and depression and anger and worry and pain, and not just pain, the anxiety about pain. So when we experience pain, we often amplify that by being freaked out about pain. So mindfulness meditation works to decrease that anxiety about the pain, which increases our experience of it, but it also seems to work on the neural signals that communicate between our body and our brain, so that we actually, the pain signals are actually weaker. So that's very interesting, just learning about that. Decreased stress, decrease in a lot of poor health behaviors such as substance use and binge eating. They also find that it reduces cortisol levels, all kinds of really good stuff. We also know through brain imaging studies that mindfulness meditation increases the structural and functional connections within and between areas of the prefrontal cortex that are in charge of the regulation of emotions, regulation of emotional reactions, attention regulation, and taking the perspective of others, which is really important in my research with kids in the juvenile justice system. Okay, so there's a lot of attention nowadays about mindfulness and mindfulness meditation, and it can be quite confusing. There's a lot of kind of watered down versions of mindfulness instruction. All of the 90% of the brain imaging studies have been done on mindfulness meditation versus some of the other mindfulness activities that sometimes are associated with dialectical behavior therapy. There's like a sports associate one that's done with sports. I don't remember what the name of it is, but those may not have the same impact or the same outcomes. Mindfulness meditation is a practice of maintaining mindfulness. So what is mindfulness? What is being mindful? So mindfulness is, bottom line, being in the moment, or most commonly defined as non-judgmental present time awareness. So it is a specific state that arises when one is purposefully attending to the present moment's experience. It is a trait that varies between people and within people at different times. So it is something that we can increase with practice. And third, it is a practice. So there are several different types of mindfulness practices. As I said, the most effective seems to be mindfulness meditation, though that is just one practice. So what is meditation practice? How does mindfulness make us more, how can meditation make us more mindful? Well, we start by focusing on the breath, which sounds even more like, well, how in the world does that get me to experience pain less? Right? Well, it's not just, well, and actually we're going to try it after Bruckner talks. We're going to play one of the downloads that I use in my research, and you're going to find that meditation looks like a very passive activity, but it's actually quite difficult. And you'll all perhaps experience the difficulty of maintaining our awareness or our attention on our breath. That it takes all of about 3 seconds before we start thinking about, I'm bored. Is this over yet? What am I going to have for dinner? What am I doing tomorrow? I can't believe my colleague said this to me this afternoon, right? And so the practice is coming back to kind of corralling our attention and bringing it back to our breath. Our breath being the anchor to the moment, to bring being in the present moment. Right? So the anchor, or the breath, is our anchor to the moment, and as our attention wanders, we bring it back into the moment, anchoring it through our breath. So mindfulness meditation, at its basic, is the practice of gathering and sustaining our awareness in the present moment. Right? So as I said, the breath is an anchor to the present, to what is happening right now, to being aware of our reactions, because as we bring our attention back to our breath and we're trying, we can see what our thoughts are doing, we can watch how we are feeling, right? We can be aware of what's coming in through our senses, and we become aware of what our reactions to those things are. And eventually, once we've gotten better at that, we can expand this focus, this corralling of our attention to how does my body feel, what's happening. And then when we go out in our everyday lives, it becomes easier when things are chaotic or we're feeling fear, to remind ourselves to come back into the present moment. Because most of the time, things are okay right now. That we feel anxiety when we're worrying about the future, we feel depression, which mindfulness meditation is really effective on, when we're thinking about the past and what we did wrong or how things went wrong in the past. That generally when we are in the present moment, things are usually pretty okay. Right. So, so this awareness, so we can be painfully aware. So we can be afraid or anxious, even self-conscious, and be very aware of what we are thinking and feeling. And it's not always a good thing, right? So we can be painfully, this moment sucks, how hard this is, or how afraid I am, or how self-conscious I feel. And that's not necessarily helpful, right? So it's not just, we don't just stop with awareness. And I think that that's where some of the mindful activities lose their effectiveness, is that it's not just about awareness, because as we all know, self-awareness, self-consciousness can be very uncomfortable. That we have to bring to our meditation a non-judgment of, I was thinking again, I was worried again, I'm super bored, this is, my ankle hurts, right? In the practice of sitting meditation, the encouragement is to re-corral our attention, bring it back to the breath, and not worry about how much we're doing that, because we all do it, right? And so there's a practice of acceptance of whatever's happening. My ankle hurts, okay, my ankle hurts. I don't have to react to it necessarily, okay? So that's why the more we practice it, it's like anything else. As athletes, we all know, the more we practice a skill, the better we get at it, right? The more we practice it when we're not in a race, the more likely we're going to be able to do it effectively in a race, when our adrenaline is pumping and there's a lot to pay attention to. All right, so make sure I'm not missing anything. So how do we get to so in the sitting meditation, we are encouraged in instruction, if we have a teacher instructing us, reminding us to be kind with ourselves, to be patient with ourselves, that we all have these monkey minds that like to do all kinds of things and think of lots of different things, thinking about the past, thinking about the future, and just to be kind with ourselves and patient, and corral that awareness and bring it back to our breath. But there are a couple of other things that are happening during mindfulness, during sitting meditation, that I think really translate to everyday life even more. And one is labeling, which is actually cognitive behavior therapy uses this, labeling our thoughts and our feelings as just being that. I'm thinking again. That's a thought. So we do this during meditation. I'm thinking I'm judging that person. I'm having pain in my ankle. That we're just labeling it, and what that does is it actually gives us some emotional distance from that experience, which reduces kind of the physiological response to these experiences. Let's see. The other thing that this labeling does is it helps to diffuse our awareness from our thoughts and our reactions, right? So we tend to relate to our thoughts and our feelings as if they were real things that we have to respond to. If I'm afraid of something, it is something that is real that I have to do something about. I'm having pain in my ankle, so I have to do something about it. And what we find when we are labeling, this is the next thing, if we are labeling things and having that emotional distance and not having to respond to them, not having to always do something, is we start to see the impermanence of our thoughts, that lots of times our thoughts don't even finish themselves. That feelings come and go, that even when we have our ankle is sore, if we don't move, if we have that practice of like having some discomfort, which I think all of you probably are very good at, being triathletes, that pain often will just subside on its own. And I actually meant to ask you if I could tell this story, but I'm going to tell it.
We have no secrets. It's online.
I think that this impermanence is seeing the impermanence of our thoughts and our feelings, and beginning to relate to them differently as not me and not something I have to respond to, I think is a really powerful, what we call in research, mediator, between the practice and this non-judgment. Right? So I was sitting down to meditate one afternoon, and I'm sure he did nothing to deserve it, but I was frustrated with Bruckner about something. I don't have any idea what it was. I don't remember. So I sat down to meditate, and I noticed that when I wasn't focused on my breath, I was thinking about whatever it was and was angry. And then I would bring my awareness back to my breath, and the feeling would be gone. And then I would think about it, and the anger would come back, and I was like, how real can this feeling be that I relate to as something that I should do something about, if it can come and go that easily, right? That it's not something that is like a substance, separate, that I have to respond to, like something real. That is just a thought. It's just a feeling. And as Noah, who I listen to very frequently, says, it's just pain. It's a big one for me, having had chronic pain. It's just pain. It doesn't have to have the story of how long am I going to feel this pain, and what does it mean to have this pain, and what will it keep me from doing in 2 weeks or 10 years, which ratchets it all up to being more anxiety provoking, which is, and we also know that all that with the cortisol, that's not good for recovery and things like that, physical recovery. So the impermanence, I think, is a really big and important part. So as Noah says, we begin to see that whatever is happening right now is a process of change. Okay, so those are the psychological processes that underlie mindfulness meditation. So the neural processes, I think, are even more interesting. That every time we go from the breath to the thought and return to the breath, this is a little neural push-up. That's what I call it. It's a little neural push-up. So now I'm going to talk about the brain for a minute. Because I want to explain what I mean by a neural push-up. So there's 3 parts of the brain that are most commonly found in brain imaging studies to be impacted by mindfulness meditation. The amygdala, which is involved in the processing of input and emotional reactions, particularly threat-related stimuli and emotions such as aggression and fear. So I call that the alarm system. So it picks up from the environment things that are happening that might be a threat, and sends the alarm. That's where we get the cortisol shot, and other stress responses and fear responses comes through the amygdala. So the dorsal ACC, or the anterior cingulate cortex, and I won't say that again, ACC, the signal goes from the amygdala to the dorsal ACC, which identifies whether or not that threat is a threat to me, right? So sometimes, like, we can hear the car backfire, and it'll startle us, and and then we'll know, oh, it has nothing to do with me. Like, that's not a threat to me. So then we then everything kind of slows back down. The cortisol stops running through and adrenaline and stuff. So that's the second part of the brain that is impacted during mindfulness meditation. The third part is the ventral ACC, and that's like our brake and, I call it our brake and gas pedal. It's where, so when there's a conflict, so with the dorsal ACC, it's about me, so if there's a threat and it's about me, then that part of the brain sends out a signal of an immediate physiological or emotional reaction to keeping us safe, or responding if we're angry or whatever. So that's the emotional response. So the ventral ACC is where, if we have this emotional response, that's one signal, like we're gonna, act out emotionally. Other parts of our prefrontal cortex, see, this is the prefrontal cortex here, where these are located, where we do our highest order thinking, where we consider our long-term goals and plans for the future and what we should do. If that part of our brain sends a signal also, says no, don't punch your boss. We'll get fired, right? Walk away or say something. So then we have two competing reactions or responses. So that's when, if we have these two competing responses, then the ventral ACC will get involved. So the ventral ACC has a brake pedal and a gas pedal. And basically what happens is the ventral ACC will stop the amygdala and stop the dorsal ACC from reacting. And in the meantime, so that's the brake pedal on the emotional response, and the gas pedal, which motivates whatever long-term behavior that will support a long-term goal, right? Like keeping your job, or your partner, or jumping off the boat in the Cape. I was thinking that in the escape to Cape. So in sitting meditation, every time our attention strays and we bring it back to the breath, that's engaging these parts of the brain. That's engaging this pathway, right? Because we like to think about ourselves, or we have pain, and so that's that's a threat to our physical well-being. And so every time we bring it back to the breath, we're engaging these pathways. And in neural development, in adolescence, and actually throughout our lives, we can continue to create quicker, more efficient neural pathways, so that this becomes more and more efficient, right? These three things. All right. So every time we practice mindfulness meditation, we do these little neural push-ups. Then in the rest of our lives, we get better and better at choosing, putting the brake on our emotional responses or reactions, and motivating those long-term goals, or behavior towards those long-term goals. So I always call mindfulness meditation a neural workout. And we're not changing our thoughts. So in cognitive behavior therapy, we change our thoughts. Right? In mindfulness meditation, we change our relationships to our thoughts. We don't have to change our thoughts. We just stop reacting to them or relating to them as if they were something that we have to respond to. So we're not stopping our thoughts. We stop paying attention to our thoughts. We're not changing our thoughts. We're changing our relationships to our thoughts. We're not avoiding discomfort. Another thing we practice during sitting meditation, we practice accepting discomfort, because sometimes life is just uncomfortable. And in doing this, we're actually changing our brains. We're creating strong, fast neural connections between our emotional reactions, or those parts of our brain that are in charge of emotional reactions, and those in charge of self-regulation. Okay, so that's in sitting meditation. And so mindfulness is a practice, but it's also a trait, and it's also a state. So it's a state that once we get good at it, we can bring ourselves into it any time. At any time when things are difficult or not, we can ask these three questions. Okay, what is happening right now? Like, okay, so I'm freaking out about what it's going to be like to jump off the boat, what it's going to be like when I hit the water, or whatever. Okay, well, you know what, that's not right now. So what's happening right now? Right, and that can bring us back into what's happening right now, being in the moment. Then, okay, so, you know, right now it's like this. How do I feel about that? Okay, well, right now I feel okay about that. And even if I don't, then I can say, well, right now I'm feeling really anxious. Right, some of that labeling and that emotional distance from that reaction or that thought. And then, okay, so this is what's happening. Right now it is like this. How do I want to respond? Do I need to respond? Because sometimes we should respond. Sometimes things are happening and we should do something, you know, but that's not always. And so we can decide with a little bit of distance what our response should be. So we can start acting rather than reacting. That's all. Any questions on that's all the academic stuff. Okay.
So what I want to do, and this is where it's really kind of impacted me a lot, is we're in a sport, you know, triathlons, where there's everything's on Facebook or Strava, or we're posting our workouts and our events, and that comes with a lot of pressure, you know, pressure to perform. You know, how many times have you been standing on that beach or in that transition area going, I just don't know if I'm ready for this. No matter how prepared you may be, something happens that you didn't expect. Something happened the night before. Maybe you weren't quite feeling 100%, and then that just spins out of control. You know, you have practiced to get to the event, to get to the swim, and it's going to be a certain way, and then something minor happens, and it's not quite what you expected. The wind was blowing out of the west, and all of a sudden the water temperature dropped. And now it's like, is my wetsuit going to be enough? Am I going to be warm enough? What's going to happen? And by, you know, the tools that Michelle was talking about, labeling that as this is what it is. You know, when you go to the beach and you look at the waves and the conditions, labeling it just as that. Not judging this and not judging how someone else is going to judge you if you choose not to go in, but putting some distance between it and developing the tools to make those decisions that are non-judgmental. Because sometimes you will end up in situations that cause an extreme emotional response. So this was, that was roughly 5 miles around Al-Nu'u, and Al-Nu'u is in American Samoa in the middle of the South Pacific. There's not a lot around there. The only other thing south of me was pretty much Australia and Antarctica. And we were in the top of the island, and it was really nice and calm, and this was going to be great. We were down there to shoot a documentary film. I was doing this swim, and I was doing a paddle a few days later. And we get around the backside of the island, and all of a sudden, we hit this. And I'm going, this is not what I expected. The people on the boat were throwing up. There were sharks in the water. We had the turtle that led me around the back half of the island. There's a legend in American Samoa about the turtle and the shark that led the, an ancient legend about a turtle and a shark that led these Samoans back to shore. And so when I said, oh, I had this turtle that was leading me through this really bad part of this, like, the shark was there too. The shark was there as well. Of course, all I'm doing is going, it's a good thing I was just breathing and not looking for the shark to show up at the same time, because I think that would have raised the anxiety level up a little bit. But it is, no matter what the situation is, whether it's 6-foot seas like this in the middle of nowhere, that being able to just breathe and not react emotionally to what's going on. The epiphany moment for me was when I was in Monterey Bay, and I was being stung by jellyfish. The first year I did it, some of you heard me tell this story before, it was a 28-mile swim, and the first year I tried it, it's nothing you've ever seen. It was like swimming through one of the exhibits at the aquarium. And the first year I tried it, I was in there for 6 hours just stung constantly. The jellyfish were as big as the kayaks. They would try to push them out of the way. The tentacles would stream up behind them, wrap around me, so I'm unwrapping tentacles and trying to get away from that. And the venom builds up in your system, so physiologically, I was toast. I was going to be done. But before that happened, I was so upset because I trained so hard, and it was glassy and calm up above, but I looked down below, and it was like everything from my worst nightmare. Head up above the water, glassy, calm, you could swim forever, it's stunning and beautiful. Look down, and it's chaos. It's pain, it's discomfort, and I just cracked. I kept going, how can this be happening? How can this be me? What did I do to deserve this? And I cracked before my body needed to. So I removed myself from having the opportunity for things to turn around. You never know if the jellyfish line is going to end just right up ahead. And then if I had held myself together, I would have been okay. Well, it turns out there was a pot of orcas just ahead, but that was another story. It was elevated breathing. But the next year I came back with a different mindset. I couldn't train anymore, but I could at least create the opportunity that when that immediate situation changed, if I wasn't emotionally tied to it, if I wasn't spun out from it, I opened up the opportunity for something better to happen around the next buoy or at the next stroke or on the bike or on the run. How many times have you had a horrible race at the beach, a horrible start, and you were still thinking about it 3 miles into the run? Okay? It happens to all of us. It happens to everybody. I don't care if they're a professional or doing it for the first time. Current, waves, come back to the breath. It doesn't matter what's going on. You want to come back to what can I control, and it's how I respond to this. Now, I'm not saying that you don't sometimes go down to the beach and conditions are really bad and you go, I don't want to be here. This looks really dangerous. I'm afraid. Sometimes that fear, if we label it as I'm feeling fear, but we look at the conditions and we go, I need to be afraid of this. I should be respectful of this. And maybe respect is perhaps a little bit better than fear. There are times when I go down to the beach and go, I'm afraid, and I need to pay attention to that. Because if I'm feeling a little bit of fear, then what else is going on? Is there something going on where I really don't need to be out there? What was that? Maybe it's another competitor, maybe it's one of those fins. Michelle and I were out off First Street one time, and we were swimming around the flags, and I was back at one of the flags, and I was waiting there for her, and I see her coming up towards me, and popping up right behind her is a fin, a black fin, a pretty good sized one. And she gets to me, and she sees the look on my face, and she's like, what is it? Because she's not used to seeing that look on my face. And I'm like, I need you to just stay right here next to me for a minute. We're just going to sit here for a minute. Okay, we're just going to wait. Well, it turns out I see the fin surface again, and it's a dolphin that was following her along. It's doing this and not doing this straight at us. So I'm like, okay, we're okay. But at the same time, I'm a little freaked out, and we kind of come on in because, that's, kind of coming back to it. But sometimes that fear comes from conditions. Sometimes it's other competitors. Sometimes it's just this emotion and fear of DNF. What if I don't finish? What if I don't start? What are people going to say? What are people going to think? What am I going to think about myself? What am I going to do with that? And if we open up the opportunity to be able to work through that, it's amazing what can happen on the other side of that. And we often create a good or bad situation for ourselves in an event and outside of an event scenario. And this is where this practice comes in. I hear a lot of people talking about, when we train in the winter here. It's not like Southern California where it's 75 degrees all the time, and they go out and we go, there's no excuse. I'm going to get out there. I'm going to train. I'm going to, we get caught up in the bravado and the selfie post of, look at me, covered in ice. I'm still out there. But it's funny that sometimes the things that are going to help us the most, like what Michelle's talking about, like this mindfulness meditation, of all the things I can talk myself out of doing, I will go out and paddle when it's snowing and the wind is blowing at 20 miles an hour. But I will always find a reason to not sit down for 25 minutes and just meditate and work on what's going to really help me throughout the season. It's so funny that we think about no excuses, and we think that that thing that we're making the excuses about is action. And I'm going to do this no matter what. The one thing I talk myself out of is 25 minutes of sitting and focusing, and that has a more profound effect on how I perform, especially as I've gotten older. Physically, I can't handle some of the same workouts that I used to be able to. But many of us, and triathlons are this, open water swimming is this, and I've been working with a couple of you one-on-one. The best athletes in the ocean, the best ocean athletes are not necessarily the strongest, the youngest, and the fittest. They are the smartest. They are the ones that are able to recognize opportunities and put themselves in positions to take advantage of those. I compete in surf life-saving sports, and I work with Red Bull on an event, and the main thing that we write into the rules is, hey, these are the rules, but it is the luck of the ocean, is what they call it. If you're in the right spot where that wave's breaking and you get a free ride into the beach, you just picked up 100 yards on someone, and that's just the way it happens. But if you never left the shore, if you never went out there and put yourself in that position, that luck will not find you. And in triathlons, it's the same thing. A lot can happen. You have the mechanical side of it with the bike. You have the extreme environment being an ocean, a dense medium that you have to move through. It's dynamic. It's moving with wildlife on the swim. The run, internal, how are you feeling after the swim, after the bike? There's so many things that you have to think through and move through. And in order to create an opportunity to take the advantage of all of those, it really is here. You can only prepare physically so much, but you want to make sure that you're always still in the game. And take it from me, that game can change at any time. I've done 100-mile runs and felt like I was literally going to pass out at mile 63. And then at mile 75, I was fine. And you move through the self-doubt, you wire your brain, you do these mental push-ups to give yourself the opportunity to come back to that. It's kind of like if you don't do this as a practice, it's like you don't run once and then expect to be able to run your best 5K. You're training your brain the same way you're training mitochondrial density, the same way you're training your body's ability to process more oxygen. You're doing the exact same thing. And if you're not doing both of those, you're going to be compromised a little bit. And for those of us that come into some of these sports late, myself being included, I got to take advantage of whatever mental advantage I can get, because physically I'm just never going to look like Michael Phelps in the water. I know that. So, you know, we spend all this time and money. It's been funny. I did my first Ironman distance triathlon in I think I've said this before, in 1985. My bike computer had 4 functions. Time of day was one of those critical 4 functions. It was time of day, speed, distance, and a clock. And now it's like we are so obsessed with this wheel set will save me 40 seconds. This bar will save me 2 seconds over the course of 112 miles. And so we get caught up in thinking, do all of these seconds count? And really, being aware of every second is what really counts. And that's what really creates the opportunity for us to move through. This photo is really important to me. It's from the Coolangatta Gold. I've shown clips of this. And Coolangatta Gold is like the Kona Ironman of surf life-saving sports. It takes place in Australia. It's been going on for about 30 years, and it's one of the hardest endurance ocean events on the planet. It's about a 4.5 to 6 hour long race, covers 42 kilometers, 4 disciplines, all offshore, running on the sand. In the last 30 years, only 5 Americans have done it, and I was the 5th. And I had been obsessed with it and thinking about it for 30 years, and finally had the opportunity to go down and do it. Also knowing that in some of these disciplines, I didn't have the advantage of growing up doing this like many of the Australians did. And the surf ski, which is a very specialized event on a very specialized kayak, it's one of the scariest. And I wake up the morning of the race. I've trained as much as I can, but I know I'm right at the edge of what I'm physically capable of doing. I'm right at the edge. And I wake up that morning at 3:30 in the morning. I'm staying in a hotel overlooking the shore, and I can hear the wind before I even open my eyes. And I go, I am really in trouble here, because the starting line is a half mile offshore. So you have to get your surf ski through the shore break and out into the water before you can even start the race. And my biggest fear was I may not even be able to get to the starting line. I mean, physically may not have the ability to get to the starting line. I wake up and I hear that wind and I look out and I'm going, I sent a photo of, I posted a photo and people that know me look at it and they could see, they're like, I haven't seen your face look like that before. I was afraid. I was really afraid. I'm flown halfway around the world. I've invested so much time and effort and energy into this, and I don't think I'm going to be able to get to the starting line. I've never been that afraid. In all the events that I've done, and I've done a lot, never been that afraid. And I get down there, and I had been doing a meditation practice. I'd gotten up every morning, and I recognize this. This is a fear. What I do is I just breathe. I create the opportunity. I get down to the beach, and yeah, it's blowing, and it's going to be tough. And I go, okay, I know it's going to be tough, and I'm looking at the beach, I'm looking at the breaks and the waves, I'm looking at when this is all happening. I'm like, okay, I form a plan. I label what I was feeling, I knew that, and now I go with what I know. And I can get after this, I can do this, and I removed myself from the emotional response and focused on what I know, the skills that I developed and what I knew I could do. And I got to the starting line. I barely made it through the next 25 kilometers offshore, almost lost my ski, which is also a whole other fear. But I spent 4.5 hours being pretty much afraid, constantly testing this. And what got me through it was a little bit of physical training, but more importantly, it was the mental side of it. That's what was really the opportunity to finish and then thrive. And thriving may or may not look like a podium. Thriving may or may not look like a Kona slot or a nationals qualifier. Thriving is when you finish, whether it's with jellyfish after only 6 hours and not getting across, but realizing that I created all the opportunities. I did not let the emotional response to something dictate how I actually am going to achieve the longer term goals beyond what's happening to me right now. So what we'd like to do is guide you through, or let Noah guide you through, a quick 30-minute meditation. I know it sounds like a long time. You could probably log a 5K in that period of time. But I strongly encourage you to listen. I'm going to hand this back over to Michelle and let her walk you through this. And I will tell you that for me, some of you I've worked with in the pool, and if I've given you a couple of extreme examples, but also it's use a swim, something I'm familiar with. You're trying to do something new. As Michelle sets this up, I'll stall a little bit. A new drill, a new set, something you're trying to do, and it just doesn't go right. And you go, I'm failing at this. I'm not doing this. This isn't happening. And you just kind of rob yourself of the opportunity to move through that. It happens to me every week, it seems like, and I rely on this. I do a mile for time. So I get into the pool and go, okay, I'm going to do 1,500 meters, and I'm going to do this for time. And sure enough, about 750 meters into it, I come off the wall, and I'm like, oh, I'm doing so bad today. I'm swimming so slow. I just took an extra stroke on that. I just missed a turn. And then I'll spend the next 300 meters thinking about how bad that last 25 was. And guess what? That becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. But when I go, I miss that turn, and I move through that, and I just breathe, and I take that next stroke, and I just move through that, I've been amazed when I actually look at my clock and look at my watch at the end of it going, wow, that was unbelievable. It's not necessarily the extreme times. It's the little things where changing the way you perceive that moment can have a positive impact long term. Right.
So the blue light is flashing, does that matter?
No, it should be fine.
Okay. So this is just a recording of a class that Noah led. Who knows where? Actually, there's the date on it somewhere. So follow along. Oh. So you'll hear things in the background. It's one of the things I like about these rather than like canned meditation instruction, because even when I'm doing it by myself, I get, like, people are coughing in the background, and sometimes that'll wake me up because I'll fall asleep without realizing. But it makes me feel like I'm with other people at least.
I'm going below, but
I'm meditating with this virtual.
So take a moment to find a posture that feels comfortable, sustainable.
Questions, comments, perceptions, thoughts? No thoughts? No emotional response at all whatsoever. So this is, of all the stuff, I mean, we approach, or some of you have worked with me, our approach to open water and endurance training, three-pronged: balance, power, peace. This obviously is the peace component of it. Balance, knowing actually where you are in the water, because that's kind of where a lot of stuff that we do comes from. Knowing where you are, your place in space or in the water. Power, applying that strength to move forward, move towards the finish line, move towards the starting line, and finding this bit of balance and peace in this will probably have more of a positive impact on your performance than anything else. I mean, I found like a new lease on improvement and my perception of how I'm doing. Even if I slow down a little bit, being able to change and positively impact how I perceive that performance is huge. Questions, anyone, or Sean? Yeah, what?
So these are 3 resources. It's all free downloads. All of these folks at UCLA, well, I don't know about everybody at UCLA, but Diana Winston's at UCLA, Against the Stream, and Darwin Punks is NOAA. Vinny and Mary Ann are all at Against the Stream Meditation Society in LA. But they all have all the kind of the key ingredients. So there are meditation teachers that come from some of the same background, but don't necessarily have all the key ingredients that kind of lead to are most effective at leading to the outcomes that we were talking about.
Yeah. And I'll post this presentation online on the Women's Win site, on the webpage for that. Carrie's presentation from 2 weeks ago is on there now. I just put the link up. I forgot to tweet it and Facebook it out, so you can find that. But yeah, and if you've got questions, contact Michelle or I, and we can put you in touch. But I would really encourage you. I often give people a 7-day challenge after we do a presentation that, practice this, mull it over, think about it, then shoot us back an email. Michelle will tell you that, what is it, to have a ongoing positive, ongoing impact, it needs to be repeatable, and so there needs to be some sort of ongoing engagement. We kind of build this into a habit. So I always say, look, give it 7 days, think about this, practice this, email us back questions and stuff. Say, hey, you know what, in 7 days I'm gonna revisit this. Whether you reach out to one of us or reach out to somebody else, but begin to build that habit perception.